Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, one thing that was very clear to me watching the budget was that we are in an economic doom loop and no one seems to recognise it. Neither the last Conservative government nor this Labour government. There isn't really much truth being spoken about just how much trouble we're in. But there was one absolute truth that came from Rachel Reeves this morning, and that was that this government had a very bad inheritance. Just think of it. Tax levels at post-war highs, mass uncontrolled immigration, most people coming, not actually working and being a burden and a massive cost, net zero policies, deindustrialising Britain at a rapid rate, giving us the most expensive energy in the world, and generally debt, which went up about 2.5 times during those 14 years. So the economic inheritance that Labour had was poor. And whatever the Tory leader stands up and says in the House of Commons doesn't do anything to take that away. But I have to say, I sat there thinking this really was the Alice through the looking glass budget, with a healthy dose of socialism thrown in. Yes, words mean what I say they mean, not what they really mean. She talks about growth, and yet the projections for the next few years, growth is continually being downgraded. And quite how she and the Prime Minister can talk, they literally talked repeatedly about cutting debt. Cutting debt. And yet, even in their first year, they've borrowed 21 billion more than they were forecast to borrow before they even started. And the parts that I found really difficult to swallow, she talked about entrepreneurs, supporting entrepreneurs, not understanding that actually entrepreneurial people are generally deciding not to stay in this country, let alone invest in this country. And then the sort of classic phrase, no doubt fed to her by the Treasury, that we're stabilising the economy. Well, I was in North Wales earlier this week, and having met with local businesses, family businesses, farmers, I certainly got the feeling that the economy in certain parts of this country is very much on the edge of a precipice. So none of what she really said today was true. Taxes, well, I mentioned them already, but they're now up to 38%, just over 38% of GDP. She's managed to increase taxes in the space of just over a year, nearly more than any other chancellor in history, and they had much longer to do this. Well, we're very, very clear that we genuinely are on the side of alarm clock Britain. Because here's the problem. Who is going to pay all these increased taxes? Not just the frozen thresholds, they're bad enough, but all the other taxes, whether it's on taxes or whatever else it may be, basically working people are going to be subsidising a welfare bill that shows no sign of going down whatsoever. Indeed, the Rachel Reeves version of abolishing the two-child cap will cost over £3 billion. Our plan to get rid of it for working British couples would have cost a mere £300 million every year. And if you look at the projections, they're quite clear to admit that net migration by the end of this Parliament will go up to over 1/3 a year, and that on net zero there is absolutely no acceptance from the government whatsoever of the vast damage that net zero is doing. And all you've got to do is, talk to the Jim Ratcliffes of this world who is at the moment closing down the biggest manufacturing plant left in Scotland to realise the sheer damage this is doing, and yet they're going to continue with their net zero plans. In fact, they're actually going to accelerate them. I would very much sum up this budget as an assault on aspiration and an assault on saving. Quite frankly, what she's done with voluntary contributions to pensions will, I think, kill off the SIP market, the self-invested pension plan. I think today's budget will literally kill that off and do damage to the private pension market, pretty much equivalent to what Gordon Brown did 25 years ago when he put tax on dividend earnings, which then couldn't be fully reinvested. Unnoticed, perhaps, in some areas, dividend taxes up yet again. And why would you invest if you feel there's a never-ending cycle of taxes on profits going up. Not to mention the mansion tax, which won't affect many people, but no doubt there'll be some widows living in Greater London that will be caused great distress by it. My big prediction from this budget is that the exodus will continue. They've got rid of the non-doms, well done. People that spend vast amounts of money in this country, that employ people, invest in people, they've gone. Many of our highest taxpayers, and bear in mind that 1% now pay 30% of all income tax, they're going. But worst of all of these signals from a government that literally doesn't understand business, because none of them have ever been in business, and frankly, there are few in the opposition who tick that box either. Now, my prediction is the exodus will continue, the exodus will accelerate, and the tragedy of it is the sheer number of 30-somethings who want to work hard, who want to do well, who are ambitious, and for them, they're seeing the Gulf. They're even seeing, ironically, other European countries. Milan in Italy being perhaps a very good example where young, hard-working entrepreneurs are going. That's one very, very big prediction that I've got from this budget. And the other one is, don't be deceived by being told that bills will go down. The big reach-out pledge of this budget, frozen train fares, yes, for those that commute, but energy bills, that's the big push from the government in this budget. Your energy bills will go down by £150. Bear in mind, this is the government that said they'd reduce energy bills by £300, and they're up almost exactly £300. The £150 reduction will be where they take some of the green subsidies, about 3/4 of the green subsidies off domestic energy bills, and throw that into general taxation, which means the working population will actually pay even more than we thought when I walked out of the chamber just some time ago. Energy clearly is going to be at the centrepiece of everything we fight for and stand for over the next couple of years. We cannot have an industrial strategy, we cannot reindustrialise, we cannot invite significant investment, be it British or be it foreign, until first we crack the nut of energy. And I would say this, we can't perform miracles if we win the next election, but we can at least be realistic. And we can at least say that already within reform we have people who've succeeded in the private sector, who've created jobs, who've paid taxes. And it's very much our ambition that we would have people in ministerial positions who were experts in their areas of expertise. Getting back to energy, just think about it. 10 energy ministers over the course of 14 years under a Conservative government, not one of them had a clue about energy. Just allowing civil servants to go on running these departments and maintaining a failed status quo. So we will come in with people that actually know what they're doing, the people who have worked in the private sector, and we will attempt to turn around attitudes in this country towards hard work and success. Well, one of those players who's part of the reform team, who has succeeded in the private sector and who's made a detailed analysis of this budget already, and will tell you some of the ways in which Rachel Reeves did not need to put up taxes like that, is my colleague Zia Yusuf.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, yes, it was after the leakiest budget process we've had in memory. We had a leak on the day. It was an omni-shambles budget from an omni-shambles chancellor. As Nigel has laid out, according to the OBR forecast, now taxes are indeed going up to 38% as a percentage of GDP by 2029. Welfare spending is going to be £16 billion higher by 2029. And a really important footnote on that is that despite the OBR, it's really important people clock this, the OBR have assumed that the enormous growth in caseloads and things like PIP, for example, that we have seen since the end of COVID will slow. They haven't given any justification for that, but they've just assumed that it will slow. And if it didn't slow, if it continues at its current pace, then welfare spending will be £27 billion higher by 2029. That is one of many reasons why even the current OBR forecasts, as gloomy as they are inevitably and sadly going to be wrong. We have £1.8 billion allocated to digital ID. No electoral mandate for that whatsoever, deeply unpopular in the country, and they are taking that £1.8 billion out of the Home Office budget, which is the only government department whose budget has been frozen in real terms, making a mockery, frankly, of Shabana Mahmood's statements. And at a time when immigration is the #1 issue in the country, what did Labour do? They basically freeze Home Office funding and take £1.8 billion of that budget to spend on digital ID, which is appalling. As Nigel said, net immigration reaffirmed to be up at 340,000 in 2029. By the way, when has that number ever been correct, and when has it ever been incorrect in the right direction? It's always wrong, and it is always much higher than the OBR forecast. So just a few days ago, actually, me and Nigel laid out what a reform government would have done if we were in government right now, what a reform chancellor would have done. We laid out £25 billion of savings that could have been made, and lo and behold, Rachel Reeves has just raised taxes by £26 billion. So what would we have done? What could she have done? Well, here's the key philosophical difference in terms of who has to bear the brunt of these difficult choices that need to be made. We keep hearing that, right? We've heard that. It's been the refrain of the political class for as long as I can remember. Difficult choices need to be made. Well, who should bear the brunt of those difficult choices? In Nigel Farage's view, and in my view, and in Reform's view, it should be foreign nationals who first and foremost bear the brunt of that. For too long, it has been the case of British citizens being told, pay more tax, accept worse services, while there's basically unlimited money available, blank cheques for foreign nationals. We saw that, for example, you'd have seen in the OBR document today, Home Office saying that spending on asylum accommodation is going to be £15 billion over the next decade, not the £4.5 billion, which is an already outrageous number. It's going to be £15 billion. So here's what we would have done. Number one, we would have materially cut the foreign aid budget. As we've said, of course, the United Kingdom should aspire to foreign aid. Why wouldn't we? But how can we justify spending £14 billion a year on foreign aid while, for example, 15-year-olds in Wales have a lower educational attainment than 15-year-olds in Turkey, and the British government sends hundreds of millions of pounds in foreign aid to Turkey? How does that make any sense at all? So we would put a hard cap of £1 billion on foreign aid, which would save £10 billion this year alone. Number two, we would meaningfully increase the immigration health surcharge. That is the amount of money that many visa holders pay to access our NHS, which, as we know, is already buckling under pressure and struggling. That would raise £5 billion this year alone based on current immigration forecasts for this year. And then there's the welfare bill that we just talked about, that is a runaway train to which the British economy and all of us, sadly, are attached, and is heading for the cliffs. Well, what we would do is we would stop paying welfare payments to foreign nationals. Here's our belief. We believe that the British state exists to serve British citizens, which is an outrageous position these days in the House of Commons for the most part, and with the political class, but we make no apologies for saying it is unconscionable for British taxpayers to go to work and spend much of their day paying for a benefits bill for foreign nationals. It's totally unfair. No serious country should operate that way. And the government actually hides, the Tories did this, Labour are continuing it, they basically hide the data on foreign national usage of many aspects of state, whether that's the NHS. Lee Anderson tried again just yesterday, got the same answer. Sorry, we don't track that data. What a surprise. Similarly, we don't get the data on PIP, we don't get the data on pensions, but we do get the data on universal credit. So that's why that is in our numbers. So we would cease payments to foreign nationals when it comes to universal credit, and yes, including EU nationals who are here on settled status. That would save £6 billion this fiscal year, assuming a 3-month notice period. And then we also have foreign nationals in our prisons. Over 10,000 foreign nationals languish in our jails. Most of those people, by the way, were put there under a Tory government. We should not forget that. But that number is not going down. under Labour, and recent analysis suggests £640 million is the cost annually of keeping those people. So even net of deportation costs, that's about £500 million that can be saved. And then the other major saving on the theme of welfare, which must be brought under control, is our reforms that Lee and I announced in terms of PIP, where we would take people who are receiving PIP payments for non-serious anxiety and put them on back-to-work programs, where the preponderance of academic literature in Europe shows time and again that is the best possible thing you could do for them. It's pretty good for the taxpayer too. That would save £3.5 billion this year, rising to £9 billion a year by 2029. You tot all of those up, you get £25 billion, which is just £1 billion less than the amount of money Rachel Reeves has raised taxes by. In the end, the only way that we break this country out of this doom loop that it's been in is by doing the opposite of what the political class has been doing. Kind of by definition, that's what we have to do. We need to reduce spending and allow people to keep more of their wages. Right? And the political class, the Tories, did the opposite of that year after year after year. They ran a deficit. You know, they talk now about being the party of fiscal responsibility and living within our means. They ran a deficit 14 years in a row. They almost tripled the national debt. They built nothing of significance. They took the tax burden to the highest level since World War II. All Rachel Reeves is doing is continuing the decisions that the Tories made. So that is what reform would do. We would put British citizens first. And had Rachel Reeves taken up our suggestions that we published and were crystal clear and could have been implemented right now, again, that 25 billion number is for this fiscal year. It grows significantly, and most of those numbers multiply by 2029. Had she done so, she would not have had to need to raise taxes, and this doom loop could have been stopped. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zia. Now, there was a moment in her speech when she said, some people think the answer is just to cut spending. So, well, it's quite a good start, really, wouldn't it? You know, we've got a few questions here we're going to take. I know everybody's rushed for time. We'll start with Georgia Roberts from the BBC. Microphone.
Thank you. You mentioned being on the side of Alarm Clock Britain. Just wanted to ask you about the minimum wage. You suggested a few weeks ago that it might be too high, especially talking about young people. Obviously, since then, we've seen in this budget that it's increased. Would you reverse those changes? Would you cut that back? And also, if I may, yesterday the BBC spoke to one of your former classmates who says you are being fundamentally dishonest in saying you didn't directly target him in terms of racial abuse. Are you being dishonest? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll deal with that one first. No, straight up, he's the one person that said I directly abused him. Other people didn't like my views, and those that have come out and don't like my views, one happens to be a former leader of Kent County Council, another a leader of a Liberal Democrat group in the West Country, but I absolutely deny. You know, I think this guy's recollections are simply wrong. More broadly, Zia, do you want to come in?
Yeah, look, on the minimum wage, look, we've got to be real about this. I know it's very easy to paint some headline of, oh, you know, reform want young people to do less. Well, no, it's the opposite. We want young people to do better. Look what's happening to youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is 15%. That is the highest level of the last decade outside of the COVID collapse. Now, you tell me if you think youth unemployment at 15% is remotely acceptable. And speak to people who hire young people. What do they tell you? What the government has done is close the gap between a mid-level employee and a junior employee. And this is the problem with having people who make these decisions who have never actually had to employ anyone, never had to make those sorts of decisions. Our young people are being basically thrown onto the scrap heap. Look at how many young people under 25s is the fastest growing aspect of PIP caseload. All of these things are connected, and a whole younger generation are being betrayed. I remember my first job, I earned, £3.30 or something, right, minimum wage. And it wasn't because I aspired to earn £3.30 for the rest of my life. Right, but it was a great start. It was work that was important to me. It was a Saturday job, and these opportunities are being robbed from our young people because of this. And here's the other point: the ballooning welfare bill, a core component to that, according to the OBR, is the rise in universal credit payments, right, and unemployment, which, by the way, the OBR in their own forecast keep at 5% through to the end of 2029. So the fact that Rachel Reeves cannot see how by endlessly raising the minimum wage she's contributing to the very black hole that she is having to fix is beyond us.
Yeah, I would say this too. that, to increase the minimum wage, and last year's percentage increase was even bigger than this year's. This year's 8%. It was double digits last year. To do that at the same time, that you reduce to £5,000 a year the level at which employers have to pay national insurance. The point I made was, get rid of one or the other, but if you have both, and you've just compounded it again today, we already see officially 50,000 under 18s fewer in employment this year than this time last year. It just means fewer young people getting jobs, and that, I think's a disaster. Catherine Foster from GB News.
Thank you, Catherine Forster, GB News. The Tories spent 14 years telling us they'd get net migration down. It got up to nearly 1 million a year. Labour trailed about £8.5 billion of tax rises before the election. We're now at, 66 billion plus. Trust in politicians is very, very low. Why can people really believe that you will do things differently? Because you've already junked some of the pledges you made a year ago. And also, the Prime Minister at PMQs today said reform is riddled with pro-Putin propaganda. What's your response? Why don't you order an investigation, given what happened with Nathan Gill last week?
Well, the Putin stuff's nonsense. Just because I said in 2013 that I admired him as a political operator but didn't like him as a human being, before the Ukrainian invasion, I'm a Putin supporter. By the way, the Queen met Putin after I'd said that. Whether she was a Putin sympathiser, perhaps you better ask the Prime Minister. I don't know. Did UKIP have a problem with an MEP who clearly was corrupt? Yes, it did. Did he join reform? Very briefly in Wales he did, and very briefly he was leader. I can't investigate UKIP in the European Parliament in 2018. How do I do that? Can I read people's emails? Can I take their mobile phones? How on earth can I investigate that? What I would welcome, though, is a broader investigation, because I'm quite worried about Chinese influence. I'm worried about people that should be on spy trials that suddenly are not. I'm worried about a giant embassy over some of the most important communication cables and sections in London. I'm worried very much indeed by the level of Chinese influence there appears to be, including an MP who's taken 500,000 quid from a Chinese spy, but we don't talk about that. So if we're going to have an investigation into foreign money, it would need to be done by the authorities in this country, and they would need to have real power. Real power. I haven't got the power to go back, 7 or 8 years and investigate people's messages. I simply can't do it. It's just not possible. Okay, Charanpreet Kaira, ITV.
Thank you. We've heard some criticisms of the OBR today, and given today's mishap, should they be abolished for good? And also, you said earlier this week that you never tried to hurt anybody with the comments that you made at school. You've described them as banter. Some of those who are on the receiving end clearly disagree. So given that they say you did hurt them, would you like to apologise to them?
Well, one person says they were hurt, and if they feel they were hurt, then I'm genuinely sorry. But I never, ever, ever would have said or done anything like that directly to a human being. Absolutely not. As for the OBR, well, I'm struggling to see their relevance. I mean, who produces the budget? Is it the Chancellor with her department working with the Treasury? This was very much a George Osborne idea, that if we had the OBR, it would give us fiscal responsibility. Well, let's have a think about that, shall we? Since we launched the OBR, the accumulated national debt has gone from 1 trillion to 2.9 trillion. So it doesn't appear to be working. At least a dramatic rethink.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Look, in the end, the buck stops with the Chancellor, and the fact that clearly Treasury officials have too much influence. Also, there is a direct correlation, as we just pointed out. I don't think there's a real justification for not modelling a £27 billion increase in welfare spending by 2029. There's no explanation for that in the OBR document. That is an enormous amount of money, right? She would have had to increase income tax meaningfully, actually, to fill that gap. So some of this is already politicised. We'll speak more about all of that ahead of the general election.
Yeah, there could even be an argument that the Treasury functions need to be separated too. That maybe economic policy and growth policy needs to come away from tax and spend. And that's a debate it's been talked about a little bit in Westminster over the last couple of years, but that's something we're certainly open-minded to thinking about.
What I will say is, as has already been the case, and I just want to go back to that previous question about trust in politics being at certainly a low in my lifetime. I don't remember it like this. I mean, how many things, the jury trials now being abolished for so many people, that wasn't in anyone's manifesto. So you cited the fact that Nigel said that the contract for the people for the last general election was no longer to be relied upon as a reason why somebody shouldn't trust him. I'd say the opposite is the case, actually. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to continue to promise sweeties for everybody, right, and get the front page of every single... In that speech, Nigel did, he could have gotten every front page of every centre-right newspaper by announcing a blockbuster tax cut. What did he do? He did the opposite. He said, the state of the country's finances are so dire, and we didn't win the last general election, sadly, that we cannot commit to tax cuts until the economy and the finances are on a better footing. And I want to make the point that, if we're talking about incremental new tax cuts, we've got to be real about this. Just to unwind the tax rises Rachel Reeves has put through since the general election now, we're talking at 60, 70 billion pounds. By the time of a general election, even with an early one, it's going to be into the hundreds of billions, right? So for the Tories to be talking about stamp duty, why wouldn't we love to announce to abolish stamp duty? Of course we'd love to announce it. It's just not serious. And so I put it to you, what Nigel is doing is making sure the table is set fairly and reasonably and speaking directly to the British people about what the truth is.
Yeah, we have to cut spending, of that there is no doubt. Anja Pop, Channel 4.
Hi, Anja Pop, Channel 4 News. Mr Farage, 20 people have accused you of making racist comments at school.
Oh dear, I think we've gone quite a long way towards answering all this, don't you?
But you've mentioned 3 people with political affiliations. What about the other 17? Why should people believe you over
Well, if you look at what they said, none of them say I directly attack them or abuse them. What they do say very clearly is they had different political views to me. That, that I thought Enoch Powell was right about the common market, which I did in the referendum, which was a minority position, but I held it all the way back then. And I thought he was right to talk about, not having vast community change. And by the way, that was a source of big political debate back in the late 1970s. So I think what you're hearing there, yes, some with direct political involvement, others with different political views. And by the way, look at the level of debate in Britain today. I mean, anyone that dares to question immigration numbers is likely to be screamed at as racist in the street. So perhaps not much has, in some ways, actually changed. Michael Knowles from The Express.
On that last topic, do you think the public needs to be ready for more tax rises if Labour fails to actually curb immigration, stop the boats and fix our asylum crisis?
Yes, I think the public need to be prepared for more tax rises, but I think the public also might need to be prepared for an early general election. I struggle to see this lot going on to 2029. I believe there will be a fiscal event at some point in the next couple of years, and I think she'll face at some point a budget where she has no option but to cut spending, and that I think is when the government falls to pieces. We saw today in the Commons just how strongly socialist this Labour Party is. Some of the biggest cheers for the Chancellor when she was saying, well, the sort of school I went to, you posh Tories didn't care about. So there's an awful lot of class warfare out there, and I think the risks for Labour of a massive fracture on the left are really all too real. Genevieve from The Telegraph, please.
Hi, Mr Farage. So do you believe that Rachel Reeves has breached the Labour manifesto by freezing income tax thresholds? It seems that some in the Treasury are arguing that some in Labour are arguing that she hasn't broken the manifesto by doing that. And secondly, you've previously expressed support for scrapping the 2-child benefit cap. So that obviously happened today. The Chancellor announced it today. Do you think that she was right to do that and you wouldn't bring it back in if you were to win in 2029?
She's broken the manifesto in spirit, if not literally in letter. Everyone who's at work's taxes will go up, and if inflation keeps running at about 4%, 5%, whatever it is, effectively their taxes are going to go up significantly over the course of the next few years. So, in spirit, it is without doubt, if not literally, but in spirit, without doubt, a breach of the manifesto. Let me repeat. I believe we should lift the two-child cap for working British couples in the form of a tax credit. As it turns out, what has been announced today and cheered to the rafters by the backbenches, one of the most popular parts of her whole speech was it will go to people who are already living on benefits or who were not born in this country. And that is why the cost of this will be £3 billion, whereas the cost in tax credits for our plan, which, by the way, would be one of the most pro-family things that any government had done for many, many years, our cost of that would be about a tenth of it. All right. We've got a couple more. We're going to rattle through. I know time is short. Sam from PA.
Kemi Badenoch said in the Commons that Rachel Reeves should now resign. Would you also call for this?
Well, this is the usual circus of the House of Commons, isn't it? You know, I mean, was it David Cameron said he wanted to end the Punch and Judy show? I mean, it's more farcical now than it's ever been. It doesn't make much difference, does it really? I mean, I don't see anyone that's going to replace her. I think probably the Prime Minister's position is very deeply under threat. It's clear, you know, neither of them have ever been loved by their own backbenches. They're leading the party to disaster. They're collapsing in the polls. The left are beginning to organise and really eat their lunch. A large chunk of their votes come to us already since the election. You've never seen a government in so much trouble. So I think my prediction is that at some point they'll all be forced to resign, perhaps before too long. Fraser Knight, LBC.
Thank you. Mr Farage, you said that you are struggling to see the relevance of the OBR. More immediately, do you think the chair should offer his resignation? And if I can as well, spending on pensioners is set to rise to nearly $200 billion per year by the start of next decade. Does the triple lock need to go?
Well, I've said very clearly that the triple lock, we're not going to guarantee anything on the triple lock. We'll have to see what the economics of this are like nearer the next election. But, you know, we've all got to be realistic about the state of public finances. And I still don't think that the media are serious about the state of public finances. We had 14 years of the Conservatives saying, we're cutting the deficit. Oh, that's all right then. But all the while they were cutting the deficit, it was still a massive deficit and debt exploded. And now we've got, unbelievably, a Prime Minister and a Chancellor today saying we are cutting debt. They're not. They're not. It's going up massively. Even the first year's debt was out by 21 billion. So that is why I say I'm not going to make any guarantees on the triple lock. You know, I know it's important to people. I know the cost of living is very, very high, but we can't make any guarantees on things. And it goes back to what Zia said earlier. You know, we want to be responsible. Lucy White, Bloomberg.
I was actually going to pick up on the same point there that I think you missed on the chair of the OBR. Should he resign? Do you think does responsibility need to be taken at the top level? And secondly, if I may as well, the OBR's prediction on forecast on living standards is not particularly rosy in its latest forecast. You've admitted yourself that you wouldn't be able to bring in income tax until you've made spending cuts. What would you do to transform living standards in the UK in the initial stages of your government if you were to have one?
It is possible, though, to bring in tax cuts at the same time as spending cuts. I haven't ruled that out, all right? I'm just saying we will do this the right way round. The crucial thing is absolutely crucial thing is to raise the threshold at which people start paying tax. That is the single most important tax that needs to be changed because we've got to change this relationship between being on benefits and being at work. You know, and I've met people on my doorsteps that would love to go back to full-time work, but as soon as they start to get a job and they work more than 16 hours, they lose all their benefits and they're worse off working than they are on benefits. So look, you know, we've argued for a long, long time. We'd love to get this up to £20,000 a year to give people a real incentive to get back to work. Well, somebody at the OBR should carry the can. I mean, after all the leaks that we had, I thought what happened today was truly astonishing. Zia called it an omni-shambles. I think he's wrong. It's a total shambles. Let's go to Antonello from La Repubblica.
Antonio Guerra from La Repubblica. Thank you, Mr. Farage. Talking about government spending, former generals and defence figures are asking the UK government to increase funding for defence, given the threat from Russia. If you were Prime Minister, would you increase defence spending in this country, and if so, by how much of the GDP? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is no doubt that Putin is becoming more dangerous with every month that goes by. No doubt about that. You know, I think Donald Trump really thought he could get him early to the table to have a rational discussion, and it's proved a very, very difficult thing to do. I'm also deeply concerned about China, and I don't necessarily mean that in the sense of conventional warfare, but I do think in terms of cyber warfare, in terms of hacking, in terms of all these things, you know, the nature of warfare is changing. All I do know is that we need to have significant investment in drones. Drones are going to, you know, they are rather like the tank was in 1917. Drones are going to be here to stay. And I'm not sure, and we actually talked about this over the weekend, didn't we? I'm not actually sure that in terms of procurement, we're looking in quite the right directions or thinking the right way. Thoughts on that, Zia?
Yeah, look, if you speak to, you know, any of you in the media can go and speak to people in the military, either serving or recently finished serving, and ask them, you know, what would happen to Britain if a threat actor of the level of, say, Iran, let alone China, came at us with everything they've got with drones. How long would Britain be able to defend any of our key infrastructure? And it is not very long at all. We basically have no drone stocks, sadly. So no, I think Nigel's right. I think, you know, Britain, we need to look at what Britain is procuring. Yes, we need to spend more. Actually, it was Reform talking about increasing defence spending as a percentage of GDP long before, for example, Labour were. But the key point is the country needs more money. We need to actually grow the economy. And there's no sign of that happening at the moment.
No. Enjoy the Rachel Reeves press conference at 4. Thank you very much.
Questions for the Guardian?